All right, as Corey said, my name is John Brix. Um, I started my career in EHS in the oil and gas industry up in Canada, northern Alberta. So those of you that don't know that, it's north of Montana. And just as a friendly note, we've been sitting between minus 30 and minus 40 Fahrenheit for the last probably 6 weeks up here. So it's a very different working environment. But before starting my career in oil and gas, after getting a substantial amount of time in my career in oil and gas, I had created a reputational legacy of being able to turn projects around on their safety and culture side. And it was that reputational legacy that actually allowed me to get access and be recruited by one of the world's largest IT companies. And originally to go down to South America to work on projects there to encourage the cultural change that we're looking for, specifically dealing with health and safety. Um, the tools and that you're going to be learning today, I applied in South America after having them applied in Canada in the oil and gas, where I was really, really successful. And it was a great challenge because I was wondering if these tools would actually cross cultural and language barriers. I wanted to sort of see if the system and processes and tools that you're going to be learning today would be applicable outside of Canada and what makes us unique as a culture. It was so successful that I got promoted, and now my region has dramatically expanded. So originally I started in South America, then they gave me some projects in Mexico to on top of that, and then that rolled into the United States and then Canada. But I'm presently now looking and aiding the company that I work for at moving the EHS program forward. So I have projects now in Ghana, Israel, and various locations around the world that I'm working with. But before all that, I was in law enforcement. I'm actually the big fellow there with the tattoos. And it was an amazing career. I had the opportunity to work with some really great units. I was an acting staff sergeant in our gang unit, which was a remarkable team to be working with. I was also an acting sergeant with our riot squad, and the bottom right of your screen there was special munitions operators. So I had a team of special munitions operators that I had to work with and ensure that, not only was training up to par, but also that morale and work satisfaction was also there. I was actually very lucky, and I never worked for this unit. I just couldn't see myself zooming around the streets on a Segway to get my job done. The last 5 years in my career I actually spent in our training unit, and more specifically our hard skills training. So I was a certified driving, fighting, and shooting instructor. I specialized in as a subject matter expert in the shooting. So if an officer was involved in a deadly force encounter, we would be needed to articulate why our training is specifically done in a certain way, and if the officer was compliant with our training standards or not. While I was in that unit, I did learn some really amazing skills, however. And what I learned is the power of proper training. And one way to look at it is if we can take a civilian and train them to become a police officer, which goes and, it's a very huge cultural change for that person. If we can do that successfully on this end, why in, let's say, our industry are we having a difficult time changing that culture? And really the right type of training creates culture. And the example I like to use is this picture here is actually a picture of an active shooter. And the bottom of your screen, you see what is instinctive and kind of what is a natural program for people to do when there's a threat. They get low, they get down, and they get away. But the top of the screen, you see trained behavior. And that trained behavior is actually having these officers run towards the threat. So we can make such dramatic changes in people's behavior, specifically with law enforcement training, we can definitely take all these tools and transition them into our field and ensure that we can create this dramatic cultural change on the level of ensuring that workers work safely, and that, you know, that their processes that they go through, their risk tolerance matches ours. One thing that was really interesting is when I went through recruit class, recruit training was very, very different than it is now. And the training, when I went through recruit class, training was engaged through or ingrained through punishment and pain. And in fact, in the bullpen where all the instructors stayed and their offices were, that was actually a plaque that was over their door. It said punishment and pain. And then that is truly the way that training environment was structured at that time. You know, to give a prime example, if you made a mistake once, you got yelled at. If you made a mistake the second time, you actually had to go stand in a trash can because they were telling you that you're trash. If you made the same mistake the third time, your entire class would go for, you know, a 5-mile PT run in full kit while you sat in the lunchroom and did nothing. So it was a very old school paramilitary style of training. What's interesting about it, though, is that it had a 15% failure rate. And when we look at it, that is a very poor return on investment. And mind you, this 15% failure rate was not indicative just to our police service. It was an accepted standard across the board. If you hire 100 officers, 15% of them will fail during recruit training. But when we look at a return on investment on that, it costs about $80,000 to train a recruit to be ready to be a police officer. So if I asked you to invest that amount of money in my company and said, yeah, but within the first 6 months, you're going to lose 15% of that, and we won't be able to recoup that. If we look at it that way, that is a very high percentage of a failure rate with a very low return on investment. When I got into the training unit, the city was actually going through some major growing pains, and those growing pains are what caused the change. We actually had to reduce our training for the firearms aspect or the hard skills aspect from 42 weeks to 32 weeks. And the reason why we had to do this is that the range was already up at full capacity. We had a morning shift and an afternoon shift training up there. The evening shift was needed for lead abatement and risk mitigation inside the range, as well as maintenance. The range could hold a group of, it was a double bay, so we could hold 24 students at one time. So the only way we could actually get more students through our program, more recruits trained, is either by building a larger range or reducing the amount of time it took to train the recruits. And of course, the fastest avenue for increasing the amount of recruits you're putting through the system is to reduce the program. And the reason why we had such a drive to increase the amount of recruits that we were training is because the city that I policed at the time was an oil and gas city. And that was when oil was $200 a barrel. The city was exploding in population. We had attrition from older members retiring. So just to try to keep status quo, we needed to do something drastic. And that drastic step that was going to be moved forward by the senior leadership team would be the reduction in training time. So to remove 10 weeks of training is roughly 25% of our training time. So a discussion was had. Our team got together and we sat around the table, and we originally thought traditionally. We thought inside of that box. We went down the path of, well, maybe we could cut this out. Well, maybe this isn't that important. We can remove this. And it was actually one of our team members that looked at us and said, you know what? We're going about this wrong. We can't remove anything from our training, because if we remove anything from our training, it's a disservice to the member that we're teaching. These are life-saving skills, just like what we learn in the health and safety industry, but it's also a disservice to the people that we're sworn to protect. And he was like, maybe, just maybe, we're teaching it wrong. Our staff sergeant in that unit at that time was very progressive, and was a huge advocate for training. So interestingly enough, he actually, even though we needed to get recruits through the training program, he shut down our training department and sent us across the globe to take training from different agencies. I was very lucky. The training that I was given was hosted by the FBI. Went down to LA to take the course. And if you don't know anything about law enforcement, if a course doesn't have a cool tactical name, cops generally don't jump on it. So even though this was a training and instructional course, the actual course was called verbal trauma control. And the remarkable aspect of this course is I learned that we actually have two different aspects to our mind, or one way I like to look at it is we have two computers working inside of our brain. And one of them is a limbic system, or the conscious mind, and the other one's a neocortex and subconscious mind. Moving forward, I'm just going to talk to it about the conscious and subconscious mind. And what's really interesting is that less than 1% of our behavior is conscious. The majority of our behavior, that 99%, is based in the subconscious mind. One way to look at it is the conscious mind is a thinker. It has about 10 to 20% of our brain mass, and it is used for language, art, creation. It's theorized that the conscious mind was developed when we started to use language and write and be creative and do artwork. That is when that conscious mind really was developed. The other interesting aspect to the conscious mind, it has about 7 minutes of memory storage. And then after 7 minutes, it will want to take that information and transition it over to your subconscious brain, because the subconscious brain is long-term memory storage. Your subconscious mind records everything from birth to death. And we actually have a remarkable memory, even though a lot of people might say that they have a bad memory. We have a remarkable memory because it is stored subconsciously. We just don't have the tools to access it properly. And you're going to learn some of those tools today that will instantly boost your ability to recall and memorize things because of that subconscious link between the conscious and subconscious mind. Because the subconscious mind is an older brain, it will only store information through sight, sounds, smells, and emotions. The subconscious mind was not developed for language, creativity, artwork. It is a memory storage device, and it stores these memories through sight, sound, smells, and emotions. And this is key to understanding why there's a disconnect between your conscious thought and subconscious thought. The remarkable aspect of the subconscious mind is that it's always working. And if we think about it, if we're in quote unquote a dead sleep and suddenly we wake up because we hear a noise, is because the conscious mind is sleeping, but the subconscious mind is not. It's still taking in senses from our exterior environment. So the moment the subconscious mind hears a noise that's not normal, it will actually wake up the conscious mind and say, hey, there's a possible threat. We need to go out and check on this. If you've gone for surgery lately, they may ask you what kind of music you want to listen to while the surgery is occurring. And it sounds good in theory, you're getting a surgery done, but even though you're going to be unconscious, one would have to ask why you would want to listen to music. Well, the reason for that is that there was a case where a person went for surgery. After the surgery, they went and had hypnosis done. And under hypnosis, the person was able to recall the entire conversation that the surgery staff had. And that conversation was not very appropriate. And a lawsuit ensued. And because of that lawsuit, now when you go for a surgery, a lot of times they will ask you what kind of music you want to listen to, because they want to be able to shut off your subconscious brain's ability to hear. And another interesting aspect about the subconscious mind is that it is a highly efficient trained brain. I'm sure everyone on this call has had that time where they've left work, pulled into the driveway, and then not remembered how they drove home. And that is a classic example about how the conscious and subconscious mind interact independent of each other. What happens when you leave work, that's a lot of conscious thought, right? The day's done. Do I have my stuff? Yeah, okay. You hop in the car, you put your key in the ignition, and you start driving. Well, as you're driving, your brain will wander or get distracted. So it might be thinking about, the next baseball game coming up, groceries you have to get, anything like that. But the conscious mind does not like multitasking. So at that point in time, the conscious mind will go to your subconscious mind and say, hey, you've done this before. Let us know when you're in the driveway. And then the two of them go and function independently of each other. If we look at the complexity of driving, it is actually quite remarkable. It's road conditions, it's other drivers, it's weather factors. All these aspects tie into our ability to drive, and you're doing it on a subconscious level because you've done it before, and the subconscious mind is a trained brain. And the moment you've done it before, it can do it independently of the conscious thought. And that is why we experience something like this called automatism, where you can be distracted consciously, but subconsciously still performing a task. And that is why a lot of cops set up at fishing holes. We can be parked there with a marked cruiser with the lights on and, the big black and white, obviously a police vehicle, and people will come and still roll through the stop sign. What's happening there is on a subconscious level, the subconscious mind was driving the vehicle as you trained it to do. But if you're not training the brain to ensure that the police aren't parked there because you like to do a rolling stop, that the subconscious mind won't pick that up. It's simply doing what it's done repetitively in the past. And as I stated, 99% of our behavior is subconscious. Now think how successful your programs and that are going to be when we have the ability to access that subconscious mind properly. Because that is, once we've accessed that subconscious mind, your success rate goes up dramatically because 99% of that behavior is on a subconscious level. Only 1% of that behavior is done consciously. The other interesting aspect is the subconscious mind is hundreds of times more powerful than your conscious mind. The subconscious mind is able to take in a phenomenal amount of data and process it and thin it out in a way through various different types of programs that happen subconsciously. And then that information gives over to our conscious mind. And one of the ways it was worded to me is a subconscious mind could watch 100 movies at the same time. So it can process and analyze and determine what information is important or not out of 100 movies playing at the same time. Whereas the conscious mind likes one movie at a time. Like we said, it really does not like multitasking. Knowing this, now we see a huge untapped potential, not only for what we do in the safety industry, but when you think about it, this applies directly to you. So a lot of these tools we're going to learn today will be able to use at work in your safety program and increase your safety management system. But these tools you can use for yourself immediately, and you're actually going to find a very immediate response on how successful you'll be. Like I said, we're going to learn how to increase your memory. We're going to learn all these different tools that you can do them right away, and you'd be surprised how effective and fast they are. So now that we know that there's this disconnect between our conscious and subconscious mind, let's go down the task of how do we teach the subconscious mind properly? And one way to look at it is I'm going to give you these tools, but then you can also use these tools to identify gaps in how your company or you're doing your safety programs. We're going to learn 4 things today. One of them is called memory tagging. The other one's called visualization. Then we're going to learn about verbal pathways. And the final one is going to be a memory recall trigger. Memory tagging is one of the most and immediate ways that you're going to be able to improve your memory or somebody else's memory. And all that is to remove the ability of language, because that is conscious. And we're going to learn a tool about how to substitute language out for memory tags, because that is the way the subconscious mind likes to function. So when we look at this language here, remember to take the garbage out in the morning. And before I learned memory tagging, I was the guy that was racing out at the wee hours in the morning with my bag of garbage, trying to catch up to the garbage truck, because the memory tag that I did get was the sound of the garbage truck, which then would remind me, oh no, I forgot to bring out the garbage. So what I do now is when I need to take out the garbage in the morning, I know habitually what I will do is I will always make myself a cup of coffee. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is the way I start off my morning. So I actually use the image of my coffee pot as a memory tag. And what I will do is I will create the image of the coffee pot in my mind. And then in my mind's eye, I will create the image of my garbage can. And I'll go coffee pot, garbage can, coffee pot, garbage can, and that's it. Generally, when you memory tag or do just about anything in life, the subconscious mind loves 3. For some reason, the subconscious brain loves the repetition of 3. And if we go up to a door and we knock on it, on average, we will knock 3 times. If I give you a phone number, the easiest aspects of that phone number to remember are the 3 digits. The moment that you have a 4-digit number is where it gets hard for us. So subconsciously, we like 3. So that's why when I do a memory tag, I bounce between the tagging picture and the activity 3 times. It takes about 6 seconds to get a memory tag installed. So what will happen is, now that I've memory tagged it, I'll go down in the morning to make my cup of coffee. And the moment I see my coffee pot, I will get an image of my garbage can in my mind's eye. This is my subconscious mind talking to me. Its subconscious mind will not use language. It won't be like, hey, you need to take out the garbage, but it will flash the picture of my garbage can. And that is my notification. Just like a notification on the phone, you need to do it right away. Because if you don't, you kind of just hit snooze on the notification, and you'll probably get your memory triggered again when you hear the auditory sound of the garbage truck. So the trick is, before I even start to make my coffee, I take my garbage and bring it out to the curb, and then come back and start my coffee making ritual. We had an incident when I worked oil and gas where it was for remote workers, and this is an incident with one of the corrective actions that we utilized. And what happened is that the remote worker was out there by himself. The company did not have a great legacy of remote worker contact, and unfortunately the worker had a heart attack while he was out in the field. We only figured it out about 16 hours later that he was missing. So that was a huge, huge event. And really, at the end of the day, what we did was we started a memory tagging protocol or process. And the example I would give is, let's say a remote worker needs to go out and do some work on a site, but there's a very unique spool like this one, a yellow and blue spool. So what I would do is and this is what we trained all the supervisors for, is to say, hey, when you go out to that site and you see the yellow and blue spool, whatever is unique to the site, just remember that you need to call us right away. And I would tell these supervisors, you know what, hold up a phone or something like that, because we want to get away from language and we want to start getting on images. In their mind's eye, you created an image of the blue and yellow spool that they were familiar with, and then you hold up your phone and you say, you know, call right away. This would be repeated 3 times, and it was very structured on how the training went. But really, each time the message can get a little bit shorter. So you wait about 7 minutes or so, and then even when you're going through the toolbox, you can look at the person and say, oh yeah, when you see that spool, what are you going to remember to do? Yeah, I'm going to call. And the reason why we wait more than 7 minutes is because that is the time, the maximum data storage time that this conscious mind has. So we went through, made these changes. This was one of our corrective actions, was I trained the trainer on how to do a proper memory tag. The data we had collected before on the success rate of our remote worker call-in program sadly was less than 10%. When we made these changes on memory tagging and structured it with a training program to get the supervisors involved, we found that success rate of that program was over 80% after 30 days. So we saw this huge dramatic change because we installed it on a subconscious level. And that 80% success rate held for, well, I left after 4 years. So the entire 4 years that I was there, because this was an event that happened very early, was still there and was improving continually. So it shows a very short amount of time was used, but it worked really, really well. Because I work a lot in data centers, I use this as my memory tag. And a lot of people will come in my office and they're kind of, it's still construction. So they'll kind of give me a hard time that it feels like a spa with my little salt lamp. But what happens is out in the field, you're not allowed to write anything down. You're not allowed to have a phone. You're not allowed to have anything like that when you're inside of a data center. It's very, very controlled. So to remind me of what I need to do, I will look, let's say I need to look at fall protection on a scaffold. So I will take a mental snapshot of that scaffold that I'm looking at, and then I will add that to a mental picture of my salt lamp. I'll bounce back and forth, that repetition of 3, so it takes me 6 seconds. And then after that, I leave it alone. When I go into the office and I see my salt lamp, everything I've memory tagged to that salt lamp, it can be 1 thing or 10 things, all those images will start to pop into my mind's eye. If I can't take care of it right away, I will write it out on a sticky tab and put the sticky tab on my computer, because that's how I will manage that memory tag. Because I know that if I would see the salt lamp, I'm like, oh, I'll take care of that later. I've hit paused on that memory tag, and it will be difficult to get things done on time. So I'll just put it on a sticky note and then go through the process of going through my tasks. And this is nothing new. Memory tags have been around forever. For the longest time, it was like tie a string around your finger to remember X. It had nothing to do with the string. It was the image associated to it. It was the image of like, remember to pick up milk when you get home. So memory tags have been around a very long time. We're just not in the process of utilizing it very much. Here's another great example of a memory tag that was done. I did this exact presentation in oil and gas. And a fellow came up to me, and at that point in time, I worked a 7 and 7. So 7 days up north, 7 days at home. It was the last day of us on site, and we're getting ready to rotate out. And this guy comes up to me and he's like, hey, I got a question. I have a teenage daughter, and we fight all the time. And I think I'm just sharing this information wrong with her. And so I was like, well, what do you guys fight about from the majority? And he's like, well, when she goes out with her friends, she always forgets to call. She forgets to call to let me know that she's coming home or that they're changing locations. And when she gets home, her and I always have a battle royale over it. And he's just like, and I think I'm doing it wrong. So I was like, all right, what's her next event? And he's like, she's going to see a movie. I'm like, okay, perfect. There's a very unique aspect to a movie theater, and that is out of sight, sounds, and smells, it's actually the smell. Movie theaters have patented the odor of their popcorn. So popcorn at one cinema franchise will smell different than the popcorn at another cinema franchise, because they know that olfactory gland is a powerful memory recall. There's a lot of times we can smell something like baking bread and be brought back to our childhood. And that's how powerful smell is for a memory recall. So with this particular event, I was like, okay, great. So moving forward, what you're going to do with your daughter is say, hey, when the movie's done and you walk out into the foyer and you smell the popcorn, remember to call me. And I told them, hold up your phone or make a phone gesture by your face. So we're associating the odor with the task. And then I said, you need to repeat it. This is going to be new for her brain to process. So what you're going to do is wait a few more minutes and say, yeah, you know what, when you smell that popcorn, what are you going to remember to do? Obviously, she'll come back and say, yeah, I'll call you, Dad. And just before she leaves, you can look at her and say, hey, when you smell the popcorn, give me a call, and then move on. So gave him the really brief 10,000 foot sort of training on it. A week later, I come back to site. To be honest with you, I totally forgot about our conversation with him, but he comes up to me right away. And he looks at me and he's like, hey, guess what? We didn't fight. He did it the way that he was taught how to do it. And he's like, she gave me a call from the movie theater to remind me that she was going to go over to her friend's house. So then it was a realization for him. It was a very amazing moment where he's like, man, we've been fighting for years. And what her behavior was not intentional. It was just not done properly. And it wasn't given to that subconscious mind. So years worth of battle was mitigated quickly just through this one task. The next thing we're going to learn is visualization. And visualization is extremely powerful, not only for us, but for the people around us. And what I'm going to be talking about is the mind's eye. When the images that are popping up in your mind as you're thinking about things, and that those images is your subconscious brain storing information. And visualization was actually utilized by athletes for generations. Coaches didn't know why, but they knew that the player that visualized or daydreamed about them being an amazing player were always better. And now visualization has been absolutely perfected because of how powerful it is. If you look at a downhill skier, they will visualize skiing that track in their brain over and over and over again. A professional race car driver will visualize the track that they need to drive on over and over again, even though they're not physically doing about it, but they will visualize it. And the same thing goes with UFC fighters. They will analyze their opponents and they will visualize their fight continually until it's fight day. And even though coaches didn't know why it worked, it was done. Everybody knew it worked. Well, neurologists now have figured out what's going on, because in the past, neurologists had a hard time studying the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. The conscious mind was really busy, really active, and almost blurred out our subconscious process. And that's for a while, we always would hear, well, we only utilize 20% of our brain. Well, no, that 20% was the conscious side. It's really busy. It's kind of loud, if we want to look at it that way. And the subconscious mind fires differently and is not that loud. And we didn't have the technology to actually see what's going on in our subconscious mind. But when this technology was developed, there was actually a very simple block test, like what we see here, was conducted. And that would be getting the person to stack the blocks in these order, from red to white. And they would get them to physically stack the blocks, but they were mapping out the subconscious mind. They didn't care about the conscious mind. And they wanted to see how the subconscious mind mapped out this action, how it was being trained. And then what they would do is take the blocks away and they would tell the people, imagine stacking those blocks as you've done it in the past. And what they found out is that the subconscious mind fires exactly the same way. So the subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between actually doing it and visualizing it. So that's why those athletes that visualized their performance did better, because on a subconscious level, the trained brain, it was trained hundreds and thousands of times more than the person who didn't visualize. And that visualization training is perfection, and it is without injury. So the athletes would naturally accelerate. But with visualization, we have to understand that there is a negative side to it. You can visualize yourself becoming highly successful, to be the best golfer, the best race car driver. But if you visualize failure, you will fail. The subconscious mind doesn't have a self-preservation mechanism in it to say, actually, that's a bad or unhealthy visualization. We're not going to accept that. So what I like to do is I like to call this subconscious sabotage, because that's really what we're doing on a subconscious level, is we can sabotage our success if we visualize failure. And the best example I could give of this is if I had this board and we were all in a meeting room together, not virtually, and I put this board on the floor. Let's say it's 12 inches wide, 12 feet long, and I ask everyone to walk across it. Well, that task would be actually a very easy task for people to do, because as you walk up to the board, your brain's going to visualize what needs to happen. It's going to start training itself. And if it's simply left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, walk across the board, success. Now I take the same board and place it 200 feet in the air between two buildings. What happens to our success rate? It drops dramatically. Why does it drop dramatically? Is because our visualization has changed. You'll see the board out there, and right away, those negative intrusive thoughts will pop in. I can't do this. You're training your brain to fail. I'm going to slip and fall. And even that slipping and falling is going to have a visualization to it. And that visualization is what you're training your brain to do. So when you get out on that board, your subconscious brain is going to be like, oh, actually, I've done this. You've trained me to do this. I'm going to slip and fall. That self-preservation mechanism gets defeated because of the visualization process. And like I said, nothing has changed on that action besides our visualization. When I was younger and I lived in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, I belonged to a downhill mountain biking team. We didn't know about visualization. We called it picking the line. And you would visualize your path down each section of what we were going to race down. And I trained and raced with a team of 5 other guys all the time. And every once in a while, we'd have somebody new, and we would wait for it, right? We'd be picking our line, and we would wait for the new guy, because we learned that no matter what, your line is perfect. And we would wait to see if the new guy would do anything like, oh, I don't know, that looks sketchy. And right away, we'd be like, well, why? And be like, well, look at that rut. There's a perfect rut there for my front tire to get caught and for me to, go right over my handlebars and wipe out. So what we would do, of course, is say, okay, you go last. And we would race down. But then what would happen is we would set up our GoPros, because we knew we would get epic footage of a wipeout. And guess what would happen every time after the wipeout happened? What would the person say? See, I told you so. And really what happened is that they trained themselves subconsciously to wipe out at that location. In our industry, we've heard it hundreds and hundreds of times. I saw that patch of ice and I knew I was going to slip. You know what? I saw that product on the floor and I knew I knew I was going to slip and fall down. We hear it all the time. And it's because of the visualization aspect. When they see the ice, they're like, oh, that looks slippery. I'll probably slip. The subconscious mind daydreams about that task. And then if you do hit a slippery part, it'll be like, yep, you're going to slip. And then people always say the same thing afterwards. I just knew it was going to happen. So moving forward, I'm going to tell you something you probably never heard in your life. It's good to daydream. You now know how to train your brain. And what I would suggest is the moment you want to pull out your mobile device and do a little bit of endless scrolling, or you're stuck in a lineup and you want to distract yourself through your electronic device, stop it. Take that opportunity to visualize something that you want to be better at. You love playing golf? Visualize a perfect golf game. You're into basketball? Visualize doing a perfect layup. If you're into studying or anything like that, visualize yourself doing it, because you're training your brain to be successful. And of course, this goes beyond training. Self-visualization is very, very important. And having that visualization of self is what is a make or break point for many people. I know that when I started to pay attention to my internal dialogue, how I talked to myself, I was shocked. I talked to myself in such a way I would never talk to another person. I was demeaning, I was degrading, and I was demanding. And as soon as I started to change that, I became more successful in my own personal endeavors. Does anyone know who these fine gentlemen are? Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. Well, if you don't, they're the first 2 people to summit Everest and live. And that living component is very important, because before these 2 guys, Everest killed everybody who tried to summit. Some people got to the summit, but didn't come down alive. On the way down, they would expire. So Everest had the wording of it's a killer mountain, nobody can do it, it's humanly impossible. And what kind of visualization does that create? As a climber, if I have that visualization running through my mind, I'm training myself to fail on that mountain just by the language that's being used by people around me. The interesting aspect is after these two guys succeeded, actively summited and came down alive, this is now what's happened. It's become an extreme vacation. It's no longer a problem to summit Everest. If you are Canadian heroes, Wayne Gretzky, if you read his book, it's all about visualization. He talks about how he daydreamed all the time about being the most remarkable hockey player. We have to ask ourselves, how do we visualize ourselves? We can subconsciously sabotage ourselves if we haven't visualized what we want to achieve. You want to lose some weight? What would you look like 20 pounds lighter? If you haven't changed that subconscious image yourself, you will subconsciously sabotage yourself in your path forward. 99% of our behavior is subconscious based. If you see yourself failing, you will fail. It is that simple. And now start to listen to your internal dialogue. See how you're doing. See how you view yourself. And for a lot of people, we talk quite negatively about ourselves, and that on a subconscious level programs us to fail. What kind of language we use? I'm lazy, I want to, I'm worthless, I suck in life. You hear that out of yourself, correct it. If you hear that and from other people, correct it. Let them know how powerful that visualization is. The next one is a verbal pathway, and this one is really interesting because the subconscious mind actively ignores certain words. One of the words it ignores is the word don't. When I use don't in an instruction, I will get absolutely the opposite. And we're going to test this out. I'm going to give you a clear verbal instruction. Pay attention to what pops up in your mind's eye. So don't think of a pink elephant. Well, the majority of people will think of a pink elephant. Even though on a conscious level, I told you don't think of a pink elephant, on a subconscious level, this is now saying, think of a pink elephant. In our industry, whatever you do, don't touch that button. And we know people are going to touch the button. And even our signage. I mean, this one, everybody reads the bottom. When I was working oil and gas, I was watching a mentor teach his worker about how to use an impact gun. Amazing guy, but he did nothing besides use the word don't. Whatever you do, don't put your hand here because you're going to smash it. And he'd give a visual representation of that impact gun hitting the person's hand. Training done improperly with the best intention. After educating him to take his word don't out and simply doing the aspect of, this is what you need to do, this is how we're going to do it, are there any questions? No, let's do it. And that is as simple as your training should get. We also need to listen to Yoda. There is no try. If I tell people, hey, this is what we're going to do, it'd be clear, yeah, okay, let's try it. On a subconscious level, I'm giving the subconscious mind the ability to fail. So our success goes low because the word try means that we can fail. It's only, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, let's do it. And if you hear somebody say, I can't, or you say, I can't, you will fail. If you hear that internal dialogue from you or yourself, you need to now work forward on changing it. The last thing we're going to go to is a mental recall trigger. And this is really understanding that your subconscious mind understands feelings, sights, sounds, smells, and emotions. So we're going to look at how to utilize this to increase our memory. Of course, we are visual learners. We have actual parts of the brain that are linked direct to auditory learning. So it's very important to understand the powerful of our auditory learning. As I discussed, the olfactory gland is a major memory trigger, and each part of our different lobes is responsible for managing this information. So we have direct access into the subconscious mind through sight, sound, smells, and emotions. When we were dealing with a recruit, she was phenomenal. Her hard skills was great. Just a rock star. Come her first exam, horrible mark. So we sat down with her and we're like, what's going on? And she told us, well, I get test anxiety. So the way we defeated test anxiety is we told her, all right, we're now going to link studying with a smell, and that olfactory gland will recall all your information. So we told her to either drink, we used the order of mint because it's the easiest one to access. So mint tea, mint gum, mint essential oils, whatever you want. While you're studying, you're going to have the smell of mint. When you go to do your exam and you sit down, if at any moment you get a mental roadblock or test anxiety, you're going to smell the mint because you're going to bring it with you. And then all the information will be easily accessed because we're bypassing the anxiety and going right to a subconscious level. We did that with her, and the rest of her exam, she was a rock star at it. One simple thing for this memory recall trigger changed everything. So that's why you can use a smell to trigger people's memory if it has something to do with a certain part of a chemical plant. You can use a sound to trigger people's memory. So when you do things and you want to share an initiative, try to think, say, is there a sight, sound, smell that's unique to this area that I can use as a mental trigger for their subconscious mind? And of course, humor is always a great way to do a mental trigger. And that's why when we make our safety news, we always try to incorporate some level of humor because it's an emotion. And we also created some really cool training shorts that are funny to ensure that the subconscious mind is accessed. And the cool part is people like to share our message on these videos because they are humorous. And like I said, it applies to all aspects of life. Look at your mentorship program. Are you using memory tags? Are you using mental recall triggers? Are you using visualization to help your mentorship programs? Are you wording, does your mentorship program have a lot of don'ts and tries in it? New and young workers are exactly the same. You can definitely imprint them very, very quickly utilizing these tools on the subconscious mind. And new work projects. It's easy enough to ensure that because it's a new work project, you can make these little micro changes on how you deliver information, and your success rate goes through the roof. And I can tell you personally, companies hire me to go through their safety management programs and streamline them. On average, I can reduce the amount of time that it takes to train somebody to be competent around 30%. I have a working legacy of decreasing the TRIR recordable rates, everything of that nature, dramatically because I'm working after the subconscious mind and how we do it. Companies are looking to improve by 1 or 2%. If you can go through your safety program and make these adjustments and show that you're having a 20% return on investment savings on training, that's rock star material. And then because of that, they want to learn more of what you're doing, and then your program can accelerate more. So let's go right back. I went to the FBI, took the course, got super excited, came back, went to my sergeant and was like, hey, this is it. We got to change everything. I already went through a training syllabus and posted, noted everything we needed to change. Sergeant slowed me down, was like, actually, no, let's take one aspect that is high risk and then apply it. If it works, we'll change the program. So a little pilot project. So what we see in this picture here is a Glock and a Blackhawk holster. The Blackhawk holster has 3 fail-safe engineered devices on it. One of them is a paddle. You have to push your finger. What you can't see is there's a paddle behind where the thumb is that you squeeze with your thumb, which then opens up the hood on the holster, and you can pull your gun out. But what you can't see here is that there's kind of a flaw in the holster. The Glock has a big blocky combat front sight. And as you pull it out of the holster, it can get hung up on that lip that's popped forward, and having it hung up strips the gun out of the hands. What we want the recruit to do is just let the gun fall to the floor, because all it takes is 7 pounds of pressure on a trigger for the gun to go bang. The gun does not recognize whether that's your pinky, thumb, or index finger. It has no idea. So as the gun is floating through the air, what people habitually want to do is grab it. And in that grabbing moment, they could put their finger on the trigger and have a negligent discharge. During my time training, it was on average for a class of 24 students, this happened about 4 times. It made a very unique noise, And us as instructors every time would panic because the person would be reaching for the gun. We never had a negligent discharge, but we were trending to have one. So what we did is we took 10 minutes worth of training and we condensed it to this. We put a rubber gun in the holster, and the old way of doing it would be with the rubber gun, and we would show them what we would not want them to do, and we'd be like, no, don't do this, don't do that. We'd say the try, and then at the end of the day, we'd repeat it 3 times, and we would still have the problem. So the new way was rubber gun and holster, and we'd stand in front of the recruit class to give them that visual representation. We pull the gun out of the holster and say, your gun may get stripped from your hands. What we want you to do is open up your hands, let the gun fall to the floor, and place your hands to the chest. Your gun is a drop safe weapon. Is everyone clear? Yep. And then we would move on. So we went from 10 minutes to roughly 60 seconds worth of training. And the incident of people trying to grab the gun in the air never happened after that. And when I was a range officer, I could tell where you were trained by how you reacted to this event. Class 134 and under would always try to grab the gun. Class 135 and up would open up their hands, place them to their chest, and let the gun fall to the floor. After we did that training, we changed our entire program. How did we do? Well, it was a great success. Our 15% failure rate went to 0%. We actually gained time. And what I mean by that is we went from 42 weeks to 32 weeks, but we were adding more training into our syllabus. Because even one small aspect of taking the gun out of the holster went from 10 minutes worth of training with failures to 60 seconds worth of training with no more failures. And other agencies actually got involved by sending us their failing recruits. And we would then turn those failing recruits around. Is there any questions? All right, so what I'm going to do is just hand this over to Corey, and then Corey will do the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Awesome, John. Thank you so much. John, I'm actually going to have you leave that up on the screen just in case anyone has any questions we don't have time to answer in these last few minutes. But if anyone has a question they want answered, please put in the chat right now.
All right, and while we're waiting for that, just to let everyone know, feel free, use my QR code, my website or whatever, feel free to reach out and contact me. I'm always really excited. I'm really passionate about this. So even on your project, you can reach out and say, hey, we're looking at doing this initiative. Can you help me tweak it? I'm super happy to help because it will also allow me to learn more and refine what I'm doing. So feel free and please reach out.